So welcome to reading 1 of the Remember It CFA Level 1 materials, and this is part of the ethics syllabus, and it's the part 1 of the ethics lessons. So it's the first one, and we're going to be looking at the Code of Ethics and the CFA Institute Professional Conduct Programme. Okay, so we know that within the Remember It materials, all the different parts of the syllabus are contained within CFAville, which you see here. And ethics is the first location within CFAville. Which is in the law courts. Let's have a slightly closer look. So you know it's the first location in CFAville because the law courts are sort of pockmarked with all these bullet holes, and bullet holes caused by gun rhymes with 1, so you know that the law courts is the first location in CFAville, and obviously law courts can be associated with the ethics, with ethics as a concept or as an idea. So that's the image to give you a nice, easy to remember way of thinking that the ethics is the first part of the syllabus. Okay, so when you go into the law courts, it turns out there's actually 3 courtrooms within the law courts. And we're going to be looking at one of those today in a bit more detail, and let's just have a look at it. And it's this courtroom here, the first courtroom. And when you go into it, you see that actually that there's some kind of strange things in that courtroom. Again, let's have a bit more detail. So the first thing, there's this fish on the wall, and there's this sort of slightly strangely dressed robber who's got a duck under his arm. So let's explore this in a bit more detail. So the first thing, the fish is actually a cod. And so this, the cod of ethics, this is. So this image of this smelly fish on the wall of the first courtroom is to help you remember that when we go into the first courtroom, we're looking at the Code of Ethics. We're considering the Code of Ethics in this lesson. So that's the Cod of Ethics. And this robber, well, actually, if you look at him, he looks a bit like Professor Einstein. And he is indeed a professor, this chap. He's a professor convict, so he's got his stripy convict suit on, and he's got a duck under his arm. So that's the image to make you think of the CFA Professional Conduct Programme, because it's a professor convict holding a duck. So Professor Conduct. That's the image to give you a link to the CFA Professional Conduct Programme. So a bit more of that later. So let's just have a quick look at the LOSs we're going to be talking about in this lesson. So these are the kind of key 3 LOSs within the CFA syllabus associated with ethics. We're not going to look at all aspects of this in this particular lesson. We're just going to focus on a couple of them. So first of all, we're going to look at the 6 components of the Code of Ethics. We're not, in this particular lesson, going to look at the 7 standards of professional conduct. We'll do that in subsequent lessons. We'll explain the ethical responsibilities required by the code. Again, we're not going to talk about the standards in this lesson. That'll be a subsequent lesson. And we will describe the structure of this CFA Institute Professional Conduct Programme and the process for the enforcement of the code and standards. So this aspect of the LOS, so the code, it's not heavily tested in exam, but it very much underpins the standards of professional conduct, which are heavily tested in the exam. And the behaviours and the approach to business that the code is designed to encourage, completely infuse the scenario type questions which are in the exam. And basically, if you're kind of unsure of the specific standards when you get to an exam, and you're not quite sure, basically, if you think back to, what would the code have me do, the chances are, you'll be on the right track. So that's the way to really think of the code and how to use it. And also, the code is pretty straightforward content. As long as you know the code, it's very easy to understand the aspects of it the behaviours that it's encouraging. Okay, so we're in the first courtroom then, and we're looking at the Code of Ethics. So this is going to be our kind of memory efficient link to the Code of Ethics. So every time you're thinking of the Code of Ethics, think of the cod on the wall in the first courtroom. The 6 elements to the code. The first element is here. So it's act with integrity, competence, diligence, respect, and in an ethical manner with the public, clients, employers, employees, colleagues in the investment profession, and other participants in the global capital markets. So essentially, what this is saying is members of the CFA Institute and candidates must act with integrity, competence, diligence, respect, in an ethical manner with everyone, really. Okay. The second element of the code, place integrity in the investment profession and the interests of clients above their own personal interests. So members of the CFA Institute and candidates must do that. Okay, key aspects: place integrity in the investment profession and interests of clients above their own personal interests. That's what all people who are CFA Institute members or candidates must do. The next one, number 3, members and candidates must use reasonable care and exercise independent professional judgment when conducting investment analysis, making investment recommendations, taking investment actions, and engaging in other professional activities. Basically, all investment activity. Okay, the key aspect here: you've got to use reasonable care and you've got to exercise independent professional judgment. Okay, you can't make rash investment recommendations or undertake half-hearted investment analysis. You've got to use reasonable care and you've got to exercise independent professional judgment for all your investment activity. Number 4, members of the CFA Institute and candidates must practice and encourage others to act in a professional and ethical manner that will reflect credit on themselves and the profession. Key aspect being practice and encourage others to act in a professional and ethical manner. Number 5, members of the Institute and candidates must promote the integrity of and uphold the rules governing the capital markets. Very straightforward. So key bits: promote the integrity and uphold the rules governing the capital markets. And number 6, the last element of the Code of Ethics: members of the Institute and candidates must 6, maintain and improve their professional competence and strive to maintain and improve the professional competence of other investment professionals. And key aspects there highlighted in red. Okay, so we're back to the courtroom, the Code of Ethics. So we've just briefly gone through them all in that kind of straight manner. We're going to look now a bit more at a memory efficient explanation of this content, see if we can really lock it into your long-term memories. Okay, so the 6 elements of the code, so we need to give ourselves a structure to remember 6 different things. So what we're going to do is we're going to use some rhyming images, images that rhyme with the number in question, and they're going to be the key kind of framework that are going to help us to remember this stuff. So 1 is going to be represented by the image of a gun, 2, image of a shoe, 3, a tree, 4, door, 5, hive, 6, sticks. Now, whenever we use lists in our memory efficient materials, we'll often use these rhyming images, and it's generally always going to be the same image associated with a particular number. And you'll see these throughout the materials and become really comfortable and familiar with the linkages. Sometimes we might not use gun for 1; it might be a bun, but it's going to be it'll only ever be a gun or a bun for 1. And the others will always be shoe for 2, 3 for tree, door for 4, etc, etc. So you'll get very familiar with those. Okay, so for the first element of the Code of Ethics, act with integrity, competence, diligence, respect in an ethical manner with basically everyone. I want you to imagine the following. So you're looking up at the cod on the wall, and what happens is the cod opens its mouth and out comes a gun. So think 1, gun. And that gun is actually held by a Shakespearean actor who's drinking a cup of tea. And when you look closely at that tea, it turns out it's full of grit. So you know grit, like you get on the road. So this is grit in tea, or in tea grit, which is the image. So this image of a cup of tea full of grit is in tea grit is the image to make you think of integrity. Okay, in tea grit, integrity. And the fact that the actor is holding a gun, that's to remind you that number 1, gun, and actor with a cup of gritty tea. Act with an actor with in tea grit. Okay, act with integrity, number 1. So it also turns out that close by the actor there's this little running track. And running around the track are all these ants. Okay, so running around a track, these are competing ants. So think competing ants, competence. So you've got an actor with his gritty tea and you've got some competing ants. And actually, as you look a bit closer, it turns out that this racetrack with the competing ants on it is actually in a country called East Timor. The capital of East Timor is Dili. Okay, so think Dili, diligence. Okay. So let's just put that up there out of the way. And then it also appears that there's a There's another ant, and this ant is slightly odd in that it's got the head of a chicken. And what it's doing is repeatedly pecking the ground around it. So this is a re-pecking ant, okay? So think re-peck, repeatedly pecking, think re-pecked, respect, okay? Let's just move him up to the top there. And then, so you've got these kind of three elements here: the act with the gritty T, the competing ants, Dilly, and the repeatedly pecking ant with the chicken's head. And then the final element that you see is basically a Greek philosopher appears, and he's on a stage and he's sort of preaching to everybody, talking to people. And this is Aristotle. So Aristotle wrote a book called Ethics, which is a fairly famous philosophical text. So given that Aristotle wrote the book, you can think of Aristotle as an ethical man. Okay, so Aristotle think ethical man think ethical manner, and he's talking to this audience. So basically lots of people in the audience think basically everyone. Okay, so and what happens in the final kind of element of our story here is that basically Aristotle opens his mouth and he swallows all those things we looked at before. They all go into the ethical man. So what you have here is a little story to help us remember that one, gun, is about acting with integrity. The first element here, the actor with his gun and his gritty teeth, act with integrity. Competing ants, competence. Dilly in East Timor, diligence. The repeatedly pecking ant with the chicken's head, respect. It all goes into the ethical man, and in an ethical manner with basically everybody. Okay, so there you go. A little story to give you the first element of the of the code of ethics. Right, for the second element of the code of ethics, place the integrity of the investment profession and the interests of clients above their own personal interests. That's what members and candidates need to do. Okay, so to remember this, think of the following. So you go back, you're looking at the cod again, and the cod opens its mouth, and this time out comes a fish. Okay, and this is another fish. This is a place, and that place is wearing a shoe. There you go. So it gives you the link to think to shoe. So you know it's the second element of the code of ethics, and it's a place. The flatfish, a place, is what comes out. And then also around the place there's some other stuff. And what you see is this. So around the place there is a cup of gritty tea here, and then you have two chests. We'll have a look at these in a bit more detail in a second. So let's have a look at the cup of gritty tea first. Well, this cup of gritty tea, it's gritty tea, so think integrity, grit, but also it's got this picture of this little character on. So that's a professor again, so the Professor Einstein type figure. So think professor, profession, and he's wearing a vest. So think invest, professor. For investment profession. Okay, so this is a gritty T, grit. So this represents the integrity of the investment profession. Okay, the other stuff that was around the nearby the place with the shoe on is these chests, and here's one of them. Okay, so this is a chest that's opened up, and inside is an ant. And that ant has got some climbing gear on. He's got a rope around his back there, backpack on. So think of him as a climber ant. Climber ant sounds like client. And because he's in a chest, this is the in chest climber ant. Okay, so in chest climber ant. Think of the interests of clients. Okay, so this image is to give you an image to think of the interests of clients. The in chest of the climber ant. And the other chest that was there, again, in chest, so interest. And this has got a purse in it, so think personal interests. Personal interests for purse in a chest. Yeah. Okay, so those are the different things that were around the place with the shoe on. And what happens is there's a bookshelf here, and the place is going to move some of those things around. And first of all, He goes down to the bottom of the inty grit, the gritty tea, with the the vest-wearing professor. So think the integrity in the investment profession, and the place pushes that cup up to the top of the shelf and puts it on the top of the shelf. Then the place goes back down, and he gets underneath the interests or in chest of the climate ant, and he pushes that chest up to the top of the shelf as well. And then he goes to the last chest, and he doesn't put this one on the top now, he just pushes it along the bottom. So what the place has done is he has moved the gritty tea with the vest-wearing professor up to the top, and the climate ant chest to the top, and he's placed them above the purse in chest, the interests, personal interests. Okay, so that little story to give you an image to think of. Number 2, the second element of the Code of Ethics is to place the integrity of the investment profession and the interests of clients above one's personal interests. Okay, so for the third element of the Code of Ethics, use reasonable care, or members and candidates must use reasonable care and exercise independent professional judgment. Think of this story. So the cod opens its mouth again, and out comes a tree this time. So think tree 3. And up in the top of the tree there are 2 sheep, and they're female sheep. And you can see they're female sheep because they're both wearing a bit of makeup. They've got lipstick on. All right. So female sheep are called ewes. So think of ewes as in 2 ewes, 2 sheep as in ewes. That's the link there. And what happens is that these female sheep, they jump down out of the tree and they go and stand on a cairn. That's a little pile of rocks, a cairn. So think cairn, care. And whilst they're up on top of the cairn, they stand next to a whiteboard and they start doing a bit of simple mathematics. So they begin to reason. So this is a reasoning cairn, ultimately. Think of it like that. So what you see here is a little image to make you remember that use on a reasoning care. So use reasonable care is the first element of this little bit of story. And then having worked out done their reasoning, and they're going to jump off the cairn again, they decide to do a bit of exercise. And what they do, these sheep, is they jump into a pen, into an animal pen, and they start doing a bit of aerobics. So they are exercising, and think of this, they are exercising in their pen. All right, they're exercising in their pen, So they are exercising independent professional judgment. And the link to give you the judgment aspect is because not only are they doing aerobics in their pen, there is a judge in the pen as well who's watching them whilst they exercise. Okay, so all those images give you a little story to remember that the third element of the Code of Ethics, think 3 tree, is where you must use reasonable care and exercise independent judgment. Okay, let's look at the fourth element. Okay, so fourth element, practice and encourage others to act in a professional and ethical manner. So for the fourth element, looking at the cod again, cod opens its mouth, out comes a door. So think 4 door, and this is a door to a doctor's surgery. So doctor's surgery is sometimes called a practice. And when you go into the doctor's surgery and you see a doctor there, and she's looking at some people in there, you see Aristotle, the ethical manner, and you see our professor again. This time he's not dressed as a convict. Professor Einstein here is just dressed in his lab coat. Okay, so think professor, professional. And the doctor is talking to is looking at these characters and talking. And the doctor's saying to other people, saying, please act like these guys. Please act like these guys. When she's talking about the ethical man there, Aristotle, and the professor, professional. So she's basically in the practice, and she's encouraging others to act in a professional and ethical manner. That's the little image to give you that link to practice and encourage others to act in a professional and ethical manner. Ethical man being Aristotle, and the professional being the professor. The link there. And obviously what we see here, the 4 fourth element, practice and encourage others to act in a professional and ethical manner. Okay, let's look at the fifth element. So fifth element, key bits here: promote the integrity of the capital markets and uphold the rules that govern them. Okay, what are we going to do? Well, let's start with the cod again. Cod opens its mouth. This time, out comes a beehive. And the beehive comes down to rest in front of you, and then it starts moving. It's sort of moving back and forward, and a crack suddenly develops in it, and the beehive breaks open, breaks in half. And what you see once the beehive is broken in half, you see this kind of strange scene. You see this market stall that is sitting up on rulers, supported off the ground by these rulers. And on selling this, being sold on the market stall are cups of gritty tea. So I think gritty tea integrity. And also little models of the Eiffel Tower. So Eiffel Tower in Paris, capital of France. So I think every time we see an Eiffel Tower in our materials, we're basically introducing it's to represent the image of capital. So basically this has got integrity here, gritty tea integrity, and this is a market stall that's representing the capital markets because of the Eiffel Tower there, giving you a link to a capital city. So basically this little image, and the other thing, obviously, because the market stall is held up on rulers, that's to give you the link to think of uphold the rules. And so that little image to give you an image to make you think of the fact that 5, this is the fifth element of the Code of Ethics, is about promoting, so for sale, promoting the integrity, the gritty tea, of the capital markets and uphold the rules with that element of those rulers there. Okay, let's move on to the last element then of the Code of Ethics, the sixth element of the Code of Ethics. Key bits being maintain and improve, members and candidates must maintain and improve their professional competence and strive to maintain and improve the competence of other professionals. Okay, so for a story here, cod opens its mouth, out comes a stick figure holding a suitcase. So stick figure, sticks, made of sticks, think sticks 6. And we're going to look in that suitcase. Let's have a look. So the suitcase opens up, and what you find inside the suitcase is there's another running track with ants on it. So competing ants, yeah. So competing ants, competence, and we've got our vest-wearing professor, yeah. So Professor Einstein wearing a vest. He's an investment professional. That's what that's representing. An professor. Investment professional. So what we've got here is competing competence and investment professionals in there. And what happens is that the stick figure goes to his suitcase and he takes out a sponge. This is sort of rag here. And what he does, the stick figure, he basically starts to polish and maintain these things in this suitcase. So gives everything a good polish. Basically, he's maintaining, think of this as him maintaining and improving his competing ants and his investment professionals, his vest-wearing professors. So that image, to give you that link, that number 6, the sixth element of the Code of Ethics, is about maintaining and improving professional competence. Right, we're going to move on now. So we've worked through the 6th Code of Ethics. We're going to look now at the last element in this lesson, which is the CFA Professional Conduct Program. So CFA Professional Conduct Program, the image to make you think of that is this here, the convict professor. So Professor Con holding a duck. So Professor Con Duck, Professional Conduct Program. And obviously he's still in this first courtroom, so you know this all linked to that first element of the first lesson within the ethics syllabus. So let's just have a look at it in a straight context. So key elements here of the PCP, the Professional Conduct Program, are that it's governed by the Disciplinary Review Committee of the CFA Institute Board of Governors, and they ultimately are responsible for the professional conduct program and for the enforcement of the code and standards. So we obviously looked at the code and standards we'll cover in the next lesson. And as part of that, part of their role, at times they may have to conduct an inquiry if there's concerns that the code or standards have been broken. And those inquiries can be prompted by a number of different sources. So first of all, it can be a self-disclosure. So a member or candidate can disclose something about themselves to prompt an inquiry. It could be caused by a written complaint about a member or candidate's professional conduct. Could be based on evidence of misconduct that has come to light, or it could be caused by a report from a CFA exam proctor. Those are the ways that an inquiry can be prompted. Okay. If an inquiry goes ahead, then it will be a CFA Institute designated officer who will conduct the inquiry, and their options at the end of the inquiry are that ultimately no disciplinary actions and sanctions are needed. There's no appropriate sanctions required. They could choose to issue a cautionary letter to the individual or individuals concerned, or they could elect to take disciplinary action against the member or candidate. And the types of things that the options that they have for those sanctions could be condemnation by peers of the individual, or they could be suspended from participation in the CFA program. Okay, so we're going to need to come up with a memory efficient way of thinking about that key stuff. Okay, so first of all, let's look at the ways in which an inquiry could be prompted. So as I said, it could be prompted by a proctor, an exam proctor. Could be based on evidence that's come to light, or it could be based on complaints that somebody's made, or it could be as a result of a self-disclosure. So think proctor, evidence, complaints, self. The first letters of all those make the word pecs. Okay, so one's chest muscles. Sometimes people call them pecs. They're your pectoral muscles. So pecs. So let's imagine then that our professor convict with the duck, Professor Conduck image. He's actually a bit of a bodybuilder, this professor, and he rips open his jumper, and it turns out he's got a massive set of pecs underneath his jumper, and he's got 2 tattoos on each pec of a question mark. Okay, so think question mark, inquiry, and because it's pecs, that's because it's pecs that those tattoos are on. That's to give you the link to pecs for proctor, evidence, complaints, and self. Well, the next element of the PCP that we need to kind of just think about and come up with a memory efficient explanation for is the possible designated officer decisions. So remember, the designated officer can say there is actually no action needed. They can issue a cautionary letter, or they can elect to discipline the individual. Well, let's imagine that a policeman arrives, and he is, so policeman, think police officer, think designated officer, and that policeman is looking at a bit of paper. So it turns out the bit of paper that the policeman is looking at, that the officer is looking at, is actually a multiple choice paper. And you've got 3 options, A, B, C. First option is to do nothing. Second option is actually a picture of a letter, so think issue a cautionary letter. And the third option is to discipline the individual. So actually think of discipline. You've got this little sort of dominatrix here with her whip. So that's the image to make you think of those 3 options. Do nothing, issue a letter, or discipline the individual. No action, cautionary letter, discipline the individual. Okay, in terms of the sanctions that could be applied, remember the sanctions are ultimately, options are condemnation by peers or suspension from the programme. To give you an image of that, let's imagine that as the policeman is doing this, strangely enough, something else appears, and it's a pier like you get at the seaside. But this pier isn't just any old pier, it's alive, it's got a mouth and it can talk. And the pier starts talking and he says, "You've been extremely naughty." So think of that as a condemnation by a peer. So that image, to give you a kind of unusual link, to give you the link to condemnation by peers. You're being condemned, you've been told off by a peer. And then this last piece, suspension from the program. Imagine that our dominatrix here, the discipline option, what happens is she actually jumps down and she hangs off that peer. So she suspends herself from the peer. Okay, so think suspension is your other possible sanction. Okay. As I said, condemnation by peers or suspension from the program. Okay, so we've reached the end of the lesson. So that's the end of the Reading 1 lesson. We've looked at the code of ethics, given to us by that memory efficient link there, and we've looked at the PCP, the Professional Conduct Program, given to us and linked to us by that Professor Con with his duck, the Professor Conduct, Professional Conduct Program. And those were the LOSs we cover. These are the elements of the LOSs. We've gone through the 6 components of the codes of ethics. We've explained the ethical responsibilities required by the code, and we've described the CFA Institute Professional Conduct Program and the process for the enforcement of the code and standards.